But Drew, wait a minute. What is that film we're talking about?
That film starring the person who's apparently become our spirit animal.
Yes.
Well, it's Die Hard in an ice hockey stadium.
Bingo.
Are we done?
Yes.
No,
sudden,
but
1995 sudden death are you talking about, Drew?
But seriously, Craig, Die Hard in an ice hockey stadium.
Yeah.
Is that reductive?
No.
Well, it certainly is. Is it inaccurate? Certainly not. Police Academy 3 and Operation Dumbo Drop scribe Gene Quintano's script gives the story credit to the wife of the then owner of the Pittsburgh Penguins, but it really ought to be giving it to Roderick Thorpe. A terrorist, who turns out to be actually a thief, has taken over a building and rigged it with explosives. He is well prepared, well armed and ruthless, and knows how to deal with the feds when they turn up. Set against him is one single man, a member of the emergency services, who is running around the building trying to gather information and gradually reduce the number of personnel commanded by the leader. There is a geeky guy wearing glasses watching everything on monitors. A member of the hero's family becomes endangered, and our hero even abseils from the roof of a tall building. Now, I just described both Sudden Death and Die Hard, and I didn't have to fudge a single thing to fit. But for all that Peter Hyams' 1995 film is a Die Hard knockoff, and it really is, for crying out loud, our French-Canadian hero's surname is McCord. Jeebus.
French-Canadian? That's not an attempt to explain away any accents or anything, is it, Drew?
No. Put such thoughts on your mind, Craig, you cynic, you.
So tell me about this McCord.
Yes. No, that's it. Despite all these similarities to Die Hard, it's also probably the best Die Hard knockoff I've seen.
Yep.
And I really quite enjoyed my time with it. And I didn't write anything more about a plot recap because it's Die Hard in a hockey stadium. There is nothing, you know exactly how that's going to go. The Sudden Death, though, does manage to add a few moments of originality through means of some inventive deaths. Among them, death by dishwasher and death by ham bone. As well as having our hero take part in the 7th game of the Stanley Cup, the spectators of which are the unwitting hostages here. It's also got one of the more memorable helicopter crashes you're likely to see. And, well, Craig, how often do you see a penguin get beaten up?
Oh, about once a decade at best.
Yeah. He's no Bruce Willis, but JCVD is in good form here. Powers Booth is a fun villain, and even the young child isn't irritating. It's well produced, entertaining, and even managed to surprise me with a character revelation. And I recommend you check it out now before Netflix's planned comedy remake ruins it for you.
What?
Yes, I had discovered this evening. Netflix, well, it's presumably off the cards now because it was meant to film June this year, but right. Netflix are planning a comedy remake of it called Welcome to Sudden Death.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How do you do a comedy remake of a terrorist sort of siege action movie?
With all the murder that this has, I'm hoping you don't. But
oh, wow. Right. Okay. Sorry, that's caught me off guard slightly. Right. I'm really glad you enjoyed this then, because you hadn't seen this up until now, had you?
I had not, no.
No. And I last watched it quite a while ago, but I say quite a while ago, it's probably 3-4 years ago now. I had this sudden recollection of having really enjoyed it, and I think I'd been speaking to someone about Die Hard knockoffs and, you know, Die Hard on an X or in a Y, and I had suggested Sudden Death to them, and having done that I thought, oh wait a minute, have I made a terrible mistake there because it's been sort of, you know, an intervening 20 years, and I mean, it is what it is, and nobody in this movie is under any illusions that they're creating great art, but I was actually really pleased to revisit it. It was a couple of months ago now, so I've not watched it in the last week or anything, but I revisited it a couple of months ago just on the spur because I had a notion that it might crop up in conversation at least anyway, and it is like really enjoyable, and it's fairly well produced, and it's in terms of Van Damme performances, it's, I mean, you know, for given values of performance when it comes to Jean-Claude Van Damme, it's definitely up there. He's really he's really engaging.
He's charismatic, absolutely. Yeah, he's very likable in the role.
He really is, and he's
and
actually
feels quite at ease.
Yeah, absolutely at ease, and he's actually quite convincing as a caring father type. And he's not. There would be the fear that you would lose some of the urgency of that you would have in Die Hard from having such a vulnerable lead, and that it would be quite unbelievable that high-kicking Jean-Claude Van Damme would, somehow feel utterly, invincible and undermine the whole sort of sense of urgency and danger in this movie. But that somehow doesn't happen, despite the fact he's clearly quite competent at kicking people in the head.
Yes.
There is still a real sense of jeopardy about it, which is the crucial thing for a movie like this. And I don't have a great deal to add to what you said, because I'm guessing a lot of people will probably have seen this because it was one of his more high-profile releases. I mean, the guy's career has only contained so many theatrically released projects. There was a huge swathe at the start and now towards the end of his career that have been sort of very much straight to video. Mm-hmm. But there was a period there in the mid to late 90s where he had a run of 5 or 6 films that sort of had wide theatrical release. And this is definitely up there. Some of the effects work now, especially in the final sequence, is showing itself to be a little bit ropey, especially with sort of high-def transfers now being pretty unforgiving in terms of anything other than a pristine matte or optical effect these days. But if you can, I was going to say, if you can excuse the rough edges, it's more part of its charm in some respects. It is still just a pretty good romp. And yeah, you know the story already, but you've probably guessed that before you sit down to watch it. And it's kind of comfort food and one of his best movies, really.
Yeah, I would say, the second half of the film becomes a little more generic.
Yeah.
The first half I particularly enjoyed, though, because Powers Booth's character is so kind of...
Yeah.
He's just got this great swagger, and the way the character's written with all his preparation and things, I really appreciate that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's really quite satisfying.
Yeah.
That, everything's so well thought out. And I say, the second half, a bit more generic, but it still has quite a bit of Jean-Claude Van Damme kicking people, so that's good.
I think Powers Booth does. It's not that he's not guilty of chewing the scenery to some extent, but I think the risk with this would have been to have had a villain that was quite as reserved as Rickman's performance in Die Hard. I think you kind of had to lean into the fact of knowing that this was a knockoff. Little lead into a later conversation there. I think you had to lean into the fact, and the film is self-aware enough to know that actually, if we're going to have this villain, let's have Powers Booth camp it up just enough. And he does sort of still come in just under the radar as believable, but sort of campy enough to make it work in the context of the movie as a whole, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he's clearly no Alan Rickman. And his Hans Gruber, because he's so composed at the start, like when he loses his rag at the end, that makes more meaningful.
Yeah.
But if you don't get a good enough actor, you try to do that reserve thing, it's going to end up completely milquetoast.
And conversely, Rickman in this movie would have been a disaster because he would have almost been too good. You would have sensed that he was in a different movie.
Yeah. There's Powers Booth, he's like, you can say there's like that. There's a wee glint in his eye. He's having fun, but it works. The character's written to the character's kind of having fun with this, even though it's not important to him. And I think he's plays it just the right side of that. He knows what sort of film he's in, but still professional.
Yeah.
Giving it just the right kind of tone that works with the film without it being, as you say, chewing the scenery and over the top, or kind of taking it too seriously and just not it being in any way interesting.
Yeah. This is that kind of mid-90s film that could have aged incredibly badly by now, but actually if you put it up against something like, did we not discuss the likes of Face Off recently? Did we not talk about that in a recent podcast and how we thought it was the absolute bee's knees at the time? And I remember you and I coming out of the cinema really excited about the fact that John Woo had translated so well to Hollywood finally. And actually, when you watch that now, that is a bad movie.
I have the feeling we've said almost exactly this same thing on the podcast multiple times now. Yeah. It also comes up in our just regular off-air conversations, so very possibly correct.
This feels like the sort of product of its time that could have aged incredibly badly. So it was actually really pleasantly pleasantly surprised to see that it's still just incredibly competent and still just sort of engaging and enjoyable enough to be worthwhile a watch.
Yeah, it's a thoroughly solid, thoroughly enjoyable action film.
Yeah, well produced and actually well performed by everybody, including our mascot.
Yeah, and it's quite nice to see too that there aren't any characters here doing things that don't make any sense.
Yeah.
Bar perhaps the one bit where his son suddenly becomes a wee git after having defended his father for being not a fireman anymore. But other than that, like, nobody's doing anything completely stupid or it makes no sense at all. It's all reasonable.
Yeah. Because the plot of this is inherently ridiculous, but it somehow comes across as entirely sort of acceptable. But yes, no, I would suggest that if you haven't seen this movie for some reason, give it a watch. Give it a watch. I just wish I could find the episode of. I don't think it'll be available anymore whatsoever anywhere. But there is an episode of Greg Proup's podcast, The Smartest Man in the World, from about 5 or 6 years ago that sort of first spurred my recollections about this movie, where he opens with a bit of a talk about how much he enjoys sudden death. And I'm not going to attempt to recreate it here, but he has a bit that he does around sudden death, which still makes me laugh now to think about it. And I wish I'd kept that episode, but there you go. That's quite by the by.